Let's look at our first case. Shaun Thomas, an exonerated man who killed. Freedom, it seems, can carry a terrifying price. For Shaun, that price was 24 years of his life, stolen by a wrongful conviction that sent him to prison for a crime he did not commit. His exoneration should have marked the final chapter in a tragic tale of injustice. Instead, it was only the opening act of a much darker story. In 1994, at just 19 years old, Thomas was convicted of killing a Philadelphia businessman named Domingo Martinez. The state's case seemed solid back then, but the evidence prosecutors buried would lead to one of the city's most shocking reversals of justice. Buried deep inside police files were 36 pages of witness statements, accounts that directly contradicted the entire case against Thomas. Yet, these papers were never given to his defense team, never shown at trial, and completely ignored. For over 20 years, Thomas sat in a Pennsylvania cell, knowing he was innocent. As the years dragged on, appeal after appeal was rejected, and keeping hope alive felt impossible. But Thomas refused to give up his fight. Finally, his plight caught the eye of the Pennsylvania Innocence Project, a group dedicated to freeing the innocent through DNA and deep investigations. As they began digging into his case, they uncovered those hidden witness statements, absolute proof that the wrong man had been locked away. In May 2017, a judge reviewed the findings and made the only just decision. Shaun Thomas was exonerated, and the courtroom exploded. After 24 agonizing years behind bars for a crime he did not commit, he walked out a free man. The city of Philadelphia later paid him a $4.1 million settlement for his stolen years. Thomas became the ultimate symbol of everything wrong with the justice system and how to fix it. He starred in media campaigns, spoke at major rallies, and championed the cause of other innocent prisoners. The story seemed complete. A man unjustly convicted, finally cleared, spending his new life fighting for those still left behind. Locked away by a broken system, but freedom turned out to be far more complicated than anyone expected. Fast forward to January 3, 2023, only 6 years after his release. Philadelphia police rushed to the 3500 block of Germantown Avenue for a welfare check. There, they found 38-year-old Ake Edwards mortally wounded. He had been gunned down. Let's take a closer look at what investigators uncovered as they tracked down clues and witnesses. What they found was shocking. Shaun Thomas, the highly celebrated, exonerated reform advocate, was now the detective's prime suspect. The investigation revealed that Edwards was caught in a dispute over a $1,200 drug debt. The argument turned violent quickly, and Edwards paid for it with his life. When police arrested Thomas, the entire city was in total shock. The very man who championed criminal justice reform was now accused of taking a life, and his desperate moves did not stop there. While locked up awaiting trial, he tried to terrify his girlfriend into silence by mailing her threatening letters. He was trying to actively sabotage the exact legal system that had once failed him and then rescued him. Prosecutors presented the letters to show his clear guilt, exposing a pattern of manipulation from inside his jail cell. On December 5, 2024, in a Philadelphia courtroom, Shaun Thomas stood before the bench and pleaded guilty to charges of third-degree murder, conspiracy, and carrying an illegal firearm. The judge was reportedly completely shocked to realize the killer standing before her was the same famous advocate she had read about in the news. The cleared man who had become the very face of wrongful conviction advocacy. The case dominated national news, with heavy coverage from the Washington Post, CBS, NBC, and dozens of other networks. Reform advocates, lawyers, and the public deeply debated what this tragedy actually meant. How does a man who lost decades fighting for freedom turn around and steal another life? Did this prove the system was right all along, or was it tragic proof of how prison permanently breaks a human being? The questions were painful, and the answers remained elusive. Thomas is set for sentencing in February 2025. He is heading back to prison for life, but this time, for a murder he actually committed. The $4.1 million he received for his wrongful conviction can never bring back Akeem Edwards. So what do we make of this tragedy? It won't ease the family's pain, nor restore the trust Shaun once held. But his story has become a flashpoint in debates about prison reform and repeat offenders. It questions what happens to people released after decades behind bars with no real rehabilitation. Some believe Thomas proves the system works and that guilty individuals eventually show their true colors. Others argue his case shows how 24 years in prison for a crime they did not commit can break a person in ways society refuses to acknowledge. Now, Shaun Thomas will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. This time, there will be no Innocence Project, no exoneration, and no settlement, just the cold reality of choices that cannot be undone. His legacy, once a tale of hope and resilience, has become a warning about the fragile nature of second chances and how quickly redemption can collapse into ruin. But if one man's fall from grace shocked Philadelphia, what happened next would horrify the entire nation. A twisted crime that unfolded on a quiet farm, where 4 young lives were taken in the most unimaginable way. Case 2. Cosmo DiNardo and Shaun Kratz, the Bucks County farm killing spree. The summer of 2017 should have been a time of freedom and possibility for 4 young men in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Instead, it became the setting for one of the most disturbing cases in the region's history, a tragedy that unfolded on a sprawling farm where trust was weaponized and lives were stolen. It all began with disappearances. In early July, concerned families began reporting their sons missing. Jimmy Terrell Patrick, 19. Dean Fino, 19. Mark Sturgis, 22. Thomas Mio, 21. They were young men with bright futures ahead of them, friends, brothers, and sons. One by one, they vanished without a single trace. The only link investigators found was that each had contacted Cosmo DiNardo, a 20-year-old college dropout known for illegal local dealings. DiNardo lived on his family's massive property in Solebury Township, located just outside of Philadelphia. The farm, spanning 80 or 90 acres according to sources, looked peaceful to outsiders. Rolling fields, wide-open skies, and the kind of rural privacy most people only dream about. But beneath that surface, something sinister was taking shape. DiNardo had a documented history of mental health struggles. By the summer of 2017, those struggles had warped into something far darker. The plan was ruthless. DiNardo and his cousin Shaun Kratz lured the victims to the farm under the pretense of a deal, but no exchange was ever going to happen. What awaited them instead was a cold, calculated betrayal. On July 5th, Jimmy Patrick arrived at the farm. Instead of a meeting, he was shot and buried alone in a makeshift grave. 2 days later, Dean Fino showed up. This time, Kratz was directly involved in the crime. Urged by DiNardo, Kratz took Fino's life. That same night, Thomas Moe and Mark Sturgis arrived together, and both were shot. The details of what followed were deeply disturbing, as evidence showed heavy farm equipment was used to commit these horrific crimes. But the horror did not stop there. The cousins tried to destroy the evidence by burning the remains in a pig roaster, then buried the ashes in a 12-foot grave dug with a backhoe. For days, the families of the missing men had absolutely no idea their loved ones were already gone. They clung to hope, putting up flyers and waiting for answers. The major breakthrough came when investigators shifted their focus to DiNardo. His behavior had been erratic, and glaring inconsistencies in his story raised immediate red flags. Once authorities searched the farm, they uncovered evidence that confirmed everyone's worst fears. DiNardo eventually confessed, and what made the case even more bone-chilling was the manner in which he admitted to everything. His confession tapes were later released to the public, and listeners were completely stunned by his calm demeanor. He was emotionless, detached, and incredibly casual about the unspeakable acts he committed. The investigation also led authorities to another family property on the 2800 block of Akhenaton Road. Inside a shed on that property, investigators discovered Thomas Mio's vehicle, along with his personal belongings. That included a life-saving diabetes kit he needed to survive a crucial discovery that helped connect all the pieces. In May 2018, Cosmo DiNardo pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms. There was no trial or drawn-out legal battle. He accepted his fate without resistance, knowing there was no defense for what he did. Today, he is serving his sentence at State Correctional Institution Huntington, transferred in January 2020 after starting at SCI Retreat. Shaun Kratz, however, took a different path, initially accepting a plea deal of 59 to 118 years in prison. But in a stunning courtroom twist, Kratz rejected the plea deal right before the hearing. He chose to fight the charges in a trial. That single decision set the stage for one of the most closely watched trials in recent Pennsylvania history. In November 2019, his trial began, with prosecutors presenting overwhelming evidence, confession tapes, forensic reports, detective testimony, and the gut-wrenching details of what actually happened on that quiet farm. They played Kratz's own recorded confession in court, painting a deeply damning picture. The audio showed that while he hesitated initially, he ultimately participated in those gruesome crimes. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned, finding him guilty of first-degree murder for Finocchiaro and manslaughter for Mio and Sturgis. He was sentenced to life without parole, plus an additional 18 to 36 years. The case drew massive media coverage. Investigation Discovery even dedicated an episode to the case, titled The Lost Boys of Bucks County, in 2020. As news outlets dissected every detail, the public struggled to comprehend how two young men could commit such cold, calculated acts. The victims' families were left to navigate a lifetime of unimaginable grief, knowing their sons had trusted someone who saw them only as targets. The tragedy also raised troubling questions about mental health and accountability. DiNardo had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and had been involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility in 2016. His parents later filed a lawsuit against his psychiatrist, claiming that these crimes could have been prevented if their son had received proper treatment and medication. Despite his documented history of mental illness, DiNardo was deemed legally competent to stand trial and accept a plea deal. Today, both men are serving their life sentences in state prison. There are no appeals pending, no chance of release, and no hope of redemption in their future. The farm where these atrocities took place has been sold, but the dark memories will never truly fade. In 2022, the property where Mio's car was abandoned was listed for $650,000. For the families, every July brings a heartbreaking reminder of the summer their sons never came home. Bonnie Finocchiaro remembered her son Dean as an incredible person with a huge heart. Melissa Mayo spoke of her son Tom as bright, funny, and full of life. Sharon Patrick, the grandmother and devoted guardian of young Jimmy Patrick, spoke through her tears about their final moments together, knowing she would never see her grandson again. The horrific Bucks County farm case stands as a grim reminder that danger rarely announces itself with obvious warning signs. Sometimes it hides behind familiarity behind a friendly face, or a simple invitation that turns out to be a trap. The four young men, Jimmy, Dean, Thomas, and Mark, each had dreams, families who loved them, and futures that were cruelly stolen. Their stories remain a heartbreaking reminder of young lives cut tragically short and the devastating ripple effects of violence. Case number 3, Dr. Kermit Gosnell and his House of Horrors. Some crimes hide behind closed doors so long that when they are finally exposed, the public struggles to believe the truth. Dr. Kermit Gosnell operated the Women's Medical Society on Lancaster Avenue in West Philadelphia for 30 years. To the outside world, he was a medical professional serving women in poor communities. But inside that clinic, something truly horrifying was taking place, a systematic pattern of illegal practices that would earn his facility the nickname House of Horrors. The truth finally began to surface in February 2010, not because of a medical complaint, but because federal agents were raiding the clinic for illegal prescription drug distribution. When investigators stepped inside 3801 Lancaster Avenue, what they found went far beyond prescription fraud. The scene inside was nightmarish. Floors were covered in biological waste, furniture was soiled, and cats roamed freely through patient areas. Medical equipment was filthy and broken beyond recognition. But these disturbing conditions were only the beginning of the nightmare. Detectives discovered jars containing fetal remains and plastic bags filled with severed feet stored in freezers, alongside evidence of procedures that violated every acceptable standard of medical care. The clinic, which primarily served poor and minority women, had been operating with virtually zero oversight for decades. Gosnell had targeted a population vulnerable enough to overlook the horrific conditions, desperate enough to return, and too isolated for their rare complaints to ever be heard. When the grand jury investigation began in 2011, the full scope of the horror became clear. Former employees stepped forward, painting a chilling picture of what went on inside. They described procedures performed well past Pennsylvania's legal 24-week limit for terminations. They recounted watching viable, living infants delivered, only to be destroyed by having their spinal cords severed with surgical scissors. These were not accidental outcomes or medical emergencies. According to testimony, this was Gosnell's standard practice. Staff described infants who were breathing, moving, and making sounds before their lives were ended. They testified that Gosnell even joked about the size of some of these babies, calling one so large it could walk to the bus. The testimonies were so disturbing that even seasoned investigators struggled to process the horrific details. This was not malpractice. It was something far more deliberate. In addition to the harm inflicted on infants, Gosnell was also responsible for the death of a patient named Karniamaya Mangar. The 41-year-old woman spoke limited English and died after Gosnell administered a dangerous overdose of sedatives during a procedure. Her passing was ruled involuntary manslaughter, exposing the broader dangers of the clinic, such as untrained staff, unsafe dosages, and a total disregard for patient safety. The case quickly became a national flashpoint. Advocates on both sides of the deeply divisive reproductive rights debate seized on the story. Some argued it proved the need for stricter oversight and regulation, while others saw it as evidence of systemic failure. But regardless of political viewpoints, the grim facts of what Gosnell did were undeniable. His trial in 2013 was one of the most closely watched legal proceedings in Pennsylvania history. For weeks, prosecutors presented damning forensic evidence alongside heartbreaking accounts from former staff members. Gosnell's defense attempted to argue that the charges were exaggerated and that the procedures were standard medical practice, claiming the media had sensationalized the entire case. But the jury did not buy it. On May 13, 2013, Kermit Gosnell was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder for 3 infants known in court documents as Baby Boy A, Baby C, and Baby D. He was also convicted of involuntary manslaughter in the death of Karnia Mangar, 21 counts of performing illegal late-term procedures, and 211 counts of violating informed consent laws. Altogether, the charges numbered well into the hundreds. Gosnell faced the possibility of execution, but in a strategic move, he waived his right to appeal to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without any possibility of parole. In December 2013, he received another 30 years in federal prison for running an illegal pill mill that distributed over 600,000 pills. Today, Kermit Gosnell remains incarcerated at SCI Huntington, where he will spend the rest of his natural life. 8 co-defendants also pleaded guilty to various charges, including 1 conviction related to taking a life. The Women's Medical Society clinic was permanently shut down, and the building was later demolished. The Gosnell case forced highly uncomfortable conversations about medical oversight and access to care, and how systemic neglect can allow such horrors to go entirely unchecked. For 30 years, complaints were ignored, inspections were avoided, and vulnerable women were left at the mercy of a man who saw them only as profit. But while Gosnell's crimes were hidden behind clinic walls, the next case unfolded in broad daylight on busy city streets, inside churches, and at workplaces, carried out by a man who believed his victims were not human at all, but demons sent to destroy him. This is the case of Juan Edward Covington, the Center City Devil. Not all violence follows logic. Some of the most terrifying crimes are committed by people completely disconnected from reality. These are individuals whose minds have fractured so deeply that the world they see no longer resembles the one we inhabit. Juan Edward Covington lived in that fractured world. Over the course of 7 years, his dark delusions would cost 3 people their lives and leave 2 others permanently disabled. Between 1998 and 2005, Philadelphia was haunted by a series of seemingly random attacks. Victims were shot without warning, without any apparent motive, and without any connection to one another. The only pattern investigators could find was the randomness itself. A pastor inside his church, a man walking on the street, a co-worker leaving a hospital. Each attack felt isolated, disconnected, and impossible to predict. For years, police had no idea they were all connected. Juan Covington suffered from severe paranoid schizophrenia. In his mind, the people around him were not just strangers or acquaintances. They were devils. He believed they used witchcraft and supernatural forces to hurt him, not that they were literal demons sent to destroy his life. These dark delusions were never just fleeting thoughts. They were unshakable beliefs that drove his every move. Born on March 3, 1962, Covington grew up in Philadelphia's Logan neighborhood. His mental health spiraled after his father died in 1990. By 1993, he stopped taking his medication, causing a rapid and dangerous decline. On August 19, 1998, Covington walked into an Old York Road church, targeting 49-year-old Baptist pastor Reverend Thomas Lee Devlin. Without saying a word, Covington opened fire. He shot Devlin 13 times, killing the pastor inside his own church. Covington later claimed the Reverend had been casting evil spells on him. In Covington's mind, this was not murder. It was self-defense against a terrifying supernatural threat. Despite early news reports, Reverend Devlin shared no relation to the shooter. Covington actually attended Devlin's funeral, looking genuinely distraught and showing no sign that he was the killer. For years, the brutal murder went unsolved. Two completely innocent men, Clyde Johnson and Morris Wells, were wrongfully locked up for crimes they never committed. Johnson, a 32-year-old social worker, sat in jail awaiting trial for one attack, while Wells was arrested for another. Their lives were shattered by police desperate to pin the crimes on anyone they could find. Meanwhile, the actual killer walked free as his psychosis deepened. On May 20, 2003, Covington shot David Stewart 9 times. Stewart, 41 years old, managed to survive but was left permanently paralyzed from the waist down. He was forced to use crutches forever. Then, on April 26, 2004, Covington shot 32-year-old William Bryant Jr. 9 times, leaving him severely disabled. Though both men survived, their lives were shattered forever. Yet, investigators still failed to connect the dots. On March 7, 2005, Covington took the life of Otis Boskett, a 36-year-old Revenue Department clerk. Boskett, a married father of 4, was shot multiple times at a subway station in Philadelphia's Logan section. He was on his way to pick up his daughter from daycare. Boskett had no connection to Covington, no history of arguments, and absolutely no reason to be targeted. But in Covington's fractured mind, none of that mattered. Boskett was a demon, and demons had to be stopped. Meanwhile, another innocent man, Morris Wells, was wrongfully charged with the murder and locked up until ballistics evidence finally connected Covington to the tragic crime. Wells was eventually cleared and freed, but just 2 months later, on May 17, 2005, Covington struck one last time. He crept up right behind Patricia McDermott, a 48-year-old radiology technician at Pennsylvania Hospital on Market Street. In a way, she was his co-worker. Covington worked for a medical waste disposal firm that serviced Pennsylvania Hospital, meaning he saw her regularly during his shifts. That morning, he stalked her from a bus stop and shot her in the back of the head in broad daylight. Security cameras caught the entire brutal execution, carried out right on a bustling city sidewalk. This time, the evidence was undeniable. The major break came when a transit bus driver recognized Covington from the security footage. The driver remembered that Covington had exited the bus at the exact same Center City stop as McDermott on the morning of her death. He also noted that Covington had severe anger issues and had previously pursued another transit bus driver, Brenwanda Smith, who had rejected him. Smith had vanished mysteriously back in 1997, leading detectives to investigate Covington's potential involvement, though he was never officially charged. On July 12, 2005, police arrested Covington for carrying a 9mm handgun with an illegally filed-down serial number. He confessed to everything. He admitted to every single shooting, claiming McDermott had been poisoning him with hospital x-rays. He believed his targets were either demons or people using dark magic against him. To his twisted mind, he was merely defending himself. Ballistics testing quickly confirmed that Covington's guns matched the bullets recovered from every single crime scene. A thorough search of his home uncovered a massive arsenal of handguns and rifles tied to McDermott's death, and also to the tragic killings of Reverend Devlin and Otis Boskett, alongside the shootings of Stewart and Bryant. The cold, physical evidence matched his wild confession perfectly. Still, the ultimate legal question remained: how do you prosecute a killer so deeply delusional he believed he was battling actual demons? Despite his diagnosed severe mental illness, the court had to determine whether Covington knew his actions were illegal, even if he believed they were morally justified. His defense attorney, Charles Peruto Jr., strongly emphasized his client's paranoid schizophrenia. Despite this medical evidence, in March 2006, Covington pleaded guilty to 3 murder counts and 2 attempted murders. This plea saved him from the death penalty, resulting in 3 consecutive life terms without parole, plus 20 to 40 years. The sentencing hearing was deeply emotional. Grieving family members described the devastating impact on their lives, and Patricia McDermott's daughter embraced the mother of Odie's Bosket. 2 families bound by tragedy. The case raised troubling questions about mental illness, criminal responsibility, and whether the courts can truly handle defendants who are legally sane but psychologically shattered. Covington knew that his violent actions were against the law. He simply believed they were morally justified because he saw his victims as supernatural threats. One forensic expert noted that Covington was a deeply delusional man who would invent reasons to harm people, yet still understood right from wrong. Today, Juan Edward Covington is locked away at SCI Rockview, receiving ongoing psychiatric care. The tragedy was later featured on Investigation Discovery's Philly Homicide and On the Case with Paula Zahn. For the families of Devlin, Bosket, and McDermott, no amount of closure can undo this senseless violence. For survivors David Stewart and William Bryant Jr., every single day brings a reminder of the damage done by a stranger. Innocent men Clyde Johnson and Morris Wells had their lives upended, while the real killer walked free. Covington's dark delusions drove him to see evil where there was none, turning ordinary people into terrifying targets. It is a sobering reminder of the horrific cost when severe mental illness goes untreated. Case 5. Ira Einhorn, the Unicorn Killer. Some of the most dangerous monsters know exactly how to look harmless. Ira Einhorn mastered that deception back in the 1970s. He was a counterculture icon in Philadelphia, a peace activist, and an environmental guru, a highly charismatic intellectual who counted famous activists like Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin among his close friends. He spoke at the first Earth Day celebration in 1970, consulting for Fortune 500 companies while branding himself a visionary. But behind that polished, peaceful image was a predator capable of unspeakable violence. His nickname was the Unicorn, a literal translation of his German last name. Einhorn loved the title, using it to paint himself as rare, special, and pure. His apartment at 3411 Race Street in Powelton Village became a hub for artists, activists, and intellectuals. They sought his advice, admired his ideas, and trusted him completely. Among them was Holly Maddox, a brilliant Bryn Mawr graduate who fell into a relationship with the charismatic activist. But by 1977, she decided to leave him as his behavior became increasingly controlling. On September 9, 1977, she went back to their shared apartment to pack up her things. Einhorn later claimed she went out for tofu and sprouts, then simply never came back. He filed a missing person report, played the part of the grieving boyfriend, and moved on. But Holly never left that apartment. For 18 months, neighbors complained about a foul odor and a dark liquid leaking from his apartment. The complaints were frequent, and the smell overwhelming, yet nothing was done. Finally, on March 28, 1979, police secured a warrant to search the premises. Inside a locked closet, they discovered the horrifying truth. Holly's mummified, partially decomposed body was stuffed inside a steamer trunk. She had suffered at least 6 crushing blows to the head, indicating a brutal and savage attack. The grim discovery confirmed what detectives already feared. Ira Einhorn had taken Holly's life and hidden her body in his own home, living just feet away from her remains for 18 long months. The arrest should have brought justice, but Einhorn had highly influential friends. Wealthy socialite Barbara Bronfman posted $40,000 bail, securing his release while he awaited trial. In January 1981, just days before his trial, he vanished. Fleeing to Europe, he escaped the justice system entirely. For 16 years, Einhorn lived as a fugitive. He drifted across Europe under fake names, eventually settling in France. There, he married a Swedish heiress named Annika Floden and lived in a converted windmill, far away from the Philadelphia family still grieving for Holly. In 1993, Pennsylvania tried him in his absence, finding him guilty and handing down a life sentence. But without Einhorn there to serve it, the sentence meant nothing. In 1997, authorities finally tracked him down in France, but getting him back would not be easy. French law prohibited sending anyone back if they had already been convicted in their absence. To solve this, Pennsylvania quickly passed the so-called Einhorn Law, which allowed defendants convicted in their absence to request a new trial after being extradited. France agreed, and in July 2001, Ira Einhorn returned to Philadelphia in handcuffs. His October 2002 trial was a media circus. When the trial began, Einhorn's defense was almost laughably bold. He claimed the CIA killed Holly and framed him because he knew too much about their secret paranormal research. He painted himself as a victim of a government conspiracy, a peaceful man targeted for knowing two dangerous truths. The jury did not buy any of it. In under 2 hours, they convicted him of first-degree murder. The following day, October 18, 2002, he received a mandatory life sentence without any chance of parole. The unicorn's carefully built image was finally shattered for good. Einhorn spent his remaining days at SCI Laurel Highlands, dying on April 3, 2020, at age 79. He never showed any real remorse for what he had done to Holly Maddox. Behind bars, he still claimed innocence, clinging to conspiracy theories and refusing to take any responsibility. The tragic case left a permanent mark on American culture. Some believe he actually inspired the Buffalo Bill character in The Silence of the Lambs, portraying a refined intellectual while hiding monstrous violence. For Holly's family, his death offered some closure, but it could never heal the decades of agonizing pain caused by a man who valued his own freedom over her life. Ultimately, Ira Einhorn proved that charm and intelligence are no defense against evil. And while his dark story finally ended inside a prison cell, our next case shows that even famous convictions can spark intense debate decades later, especially when the victim was a police officer. Case 6. Mumia Abu-Jamal, the cop killing case. Some criminal trials become far more than just legal proceedings. They turn into symbols, battlegrounds for massive debates on justice, race, and power. The story of Mumia Abu-Jamal is exactly that. A conviction so controversial it sparked decades of intense protests, books, and documentaries, and major international campaigns. To some, he is a political prisoner. To others, he is exactly where he belongs. What is undeniable is that on a cold December night in 1981, a Philadelphia police officer died, and the aftermath would split public opinion for generations to come. Wesley Cook, who would later take the name Mumia Abu-Jamal, was a former Black Panther and radio journalist driving a taxi in Philadelphia. He had a reputation for outspoken activism and a history of criticizing the police department. On the night of December 9, 1981, around 3:51 in the morning, his life and that of Officer Daniel Faulkner would collide in a way that would leave both of them forever changed. Officer Faulkner, a 25-year-old patrolman, made a routine traffic stop on Abu-Jamal's brother, William Cook, at the intersection of 13th and Locust Streets in Center City. Cook was driving his Volkswagen the wrong way down a one-way street when Faulkner pulled him over. A routine ticket quickly turned violent. Witnesses said a physical struggle broke out between Cook and the officer. Faulkner struck Cook, and Cook fought back. It was during this violent struggle that Mumia Abu-Jamal, watching from his taxi parked across the street, saw what was happening to his brother. Abu-Jamal immediately got out of his taxi and ran across the street toward the scuffle. What happened next would trigger a fierce legal and public battle lasting for more than 40 years. The state argued, backed by several eyewitnesses, that Abu-Jamal jumped into the fight and pulled out a gun. Officer Faulkner was shot in the back, and as he lay wounded on the pavement, shot several more times at point-blank range. The officer died right there. When backup arrived moments later, they found Abu-Jamal sitting on the curb with a chest wound. He had been shot by Faulkner during the chaotic exchange, though the exact sequence of events remains highly contested. Lying next to him on the street was his registered .38 caliber revolver. 5 casings lay scattered. Forensic tests would soon point directly to Abu-Jamal's weapon as the source of the fatal rounds. While doctors treated his wounds at the hospital, Abu-Jamal reportedly whispered a confession to a nearby security officer. According to testimony, he confessed, "I shot the man and I hope he dies." That chilling admission, alongside ballistics and eyewitness testimony, became the bedrock of the prosecution's entire case. Yet, the defense vehemently denied those words were ever spoken, arguing they were entirely made up to bolster a flimsy prosecution. Indeed, the first report written by Officer Gary Waxshell, who guarded him during his arrest and treatment, made zero mention of a confession, nor did his official follow-up statement next week. That supposed confession only surfaced months afterward. By 1982, the trial opened in a storm of controversy. Representing himself early on, Abu-Jamal locked horns with the judge. He condemned the court as biased and racist, shouting that a fair trial was impossible and painting the charges as pure political revenge for his outspoken activism. Still, the jurors listened to the mounting evidence, including witnesses placing him directly at the scene, the matching ballistics, the reported confession, and the empty shell casings inside his own gun that matched the fatal bullets. On July 2, 1982, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. Within 24 hours, they condemned him to die. He was locked away on death row, starting a harrowing wait that would span nearly 30 years. But as we are about to see, this was far from the end. It was just the beginning of a massive, polarizing legal saga. His name quickly became an international cause, rallying passionate activists and world-famous celebrities. Human rights groups rallied to his defense, shouting that his trial was rigged, evidence was buried, and justice was denied. They claimed witnesses were pressured by police, pointing to deep-seated systemic racism within Philadelphia's legal system as the real culprit. Supporters published books, shot documentaries, and took to the streets in massive protests across the globe. While they demanded freedom for their political prisoner, the grieving family of Officer Daniel Faulkner stood firmly on the other side, backed by prosecutors and police unions who insisted the verdict was completely solid. The officer's widow, Maureen, launched a relentless lifetime crusade to keep her husband's killer locked up forever. She sat through every court hearing, every complex appeal, and parole meeting. To her, this was never about politics. It was about her young husband, gunned down in the line of duty, and she resolved that his life would never be overshadowed or erased by the massive campaigns supporting his killer. The legal appeals dragged on for 30 years, with his lawyers continuously challenging the state's case. They argued juror bias, accused the judge of blatant prejudice, and claimed the state hid vital pieces of evidence while insisting his defense counsel was useless. Still, appellate courts reviewed the files time and again, maintaining his guilt. Yet, one legal argument finally found footing, revolving around whether the jury received the right instructions during the high-stakes sentencing phase. In 2001, a federal judge ruled those guidelines were flawed, which likely pressured jurors into believing they had no choice but to hand down the death penalty over life. This crucial decision paved the way for a brand new sentencing hearing. Following another decade of fierce fighting, in 2011, a federal appeals court officially threw out his death sentence. Crucially, though, the judges did not throw out the guilty verdict for taking Officer Faulkner's life. His conviction stood firm. Prosecutors could have fought for a new hearing to put him back on death row, but after discussing it with Faulkner's widow and weighing the endless decades of appeals, they chose to walk away. In December 2011, his death sentence was officially commuted to life behind bars with no chance of parole. He would escape the execution chamber, but he would never walk free again. Today, Abu-Jamal remains locked up at SCY Mahanoy in Pennsylvania, still professing his innocence and writing passionately from behind bars, penning numerous books and essays focused heavily on mass imprisonment and systemic bias. His loyal followers still hold rallies demanding his freedom, championing him as a global icon against a corrupt legal system. Meanwhile, Maureen Faulkner and the Fraternal Order of Police fiercely oppose any attempt to grant him clemency or a new trial, firmly insisting that justice was served and he is exactly where he belongs. The case remains highly divisive today, with legal experts still debating if his trial was truly fair, and activists arguing over what his guilty verdict really means. and the public remains divided. Some view him as a tragic martyr, while others see a cold-blooded killer who has masterfully manipulated public opinion for over 4 decades. What remains undisputed is that Officer Daniel Faulkner, a 25-year-old man just doing his job, lost his life on a Philadelphia street in 1981. And that sudden loss left a massive void in the lives of everyone who loved him. Whether true justice was served or an innocent man was thrown in prison depends entirely on who you ask. And that question, more than 40 years later, remains incredibly bitter. Now, we move to Case 7 Miles Feffer and the Temple University Police. Some moments in life change absolutely everything, split-second decisions that can never be undone. These are actions that ripple outward, destroying not just a single life, but many. On the night of February 18, 2023, Temple University police officer Christopher Fitzgerald was patrolling near campus when he made a choice that would cost him his life. And Miles Feffer, an 18-year-old with a loaded gun and zero regard for consequences, made a choice that would cost him his freedom forever. Temple University is located in North Philadelphia, an area plagued by crime for decades. The school runs its own dedicated police force to patrol the campus, striving to keep students, faculty, and local residents safe. Officer Fitzgerald, at 31 years old, he was a devoted officer known for his deep community roots. He was a husband, a father of 4, and took his oath to protect others very seriously. On that cold February night, he was working alone, patrolling the area of 18th Street and Montgomery Avenue. Around 7:12 in the evening, Fitzgerald spotted 3 figures dressed in black and wearing masks. The neighborhood had recently seen a spike in armed robberies and carjackings, so these 3 masked figures immediately raised red flags. Fitzgerald radioed dispatch that he was initiating a pedestrian stop and went to investigate. He chased down one of them, Miles Feffer, commanding him to stop and drop. What happened next took less than a minute, but the damage was permanent. But instead of stopping, Feffer bolted. Fitzgerald chased him down, cornering him on the 1700 block of Montgomery Avenue. A nearby doorbell camera recorded everything. The video shows the officer grabbing Feffer, trying to force him down. They struggled briefly behind parked cars, slipping completely out of frame. Then, sudden gunshots shattered the quiet. Feffer had pulled a concealed weapon and opened fire. Officer Fitzgerald fell, badly wounded. As he lay helpless on the pavement, Feffer stood directly over him and fired several more execution-style shots. The officer never stood a chance, but Feffer was not done yet. Standing over the fallen officer, he tried to wrench away his service weapon. When that failed, he rifled through Fitzgerald's pockets, hunting for valuables. It was a level of cold cruelty that shocked even veteran detectives. Fleeing the scene, Feffer carjacked a passing motorist at gunpoint. Forcing the victim out and tearing away, he sped wildly through the city streets before crashing near his father's residence in the Strawberry Mansion neighborhood. He ditched the wrecked car and ran, but he had left behind a critical clue. Almost his entire escape had been caught on camera. The next morning, February 18, 2023, around 7 a.m., police tracked Feffer to his mother's estate in Buckingham, Bucks County. A massive tactical team, comprising U.S. Marshals, state troopers, and local Philadelphia police, quickly took him into custody. In a final symbolic act, they handcuffed him using Officer Fitzgerald's own cuffs. By then, news of the tragedy had devastated Philadelphia, plunged in deep mourning. Temple University organized candlelit vigils, fellow officers paid solemn respects, and the community tried to comprehend the senseless tragedy. This heartbreaking case drew massive media attention. A campus police officer simply doing his duty had been ambushed and executed by a teen who cared nothing for human life. Prosecutors acted fast, charging Feffer with first-degree murder of a police officer, armed robbery, carrying an illegal gun, and several related felony offenses. These severe charges carried a mandatory sentence of life in prison. As the prosecution built its case, disturbing details about Feffer's past began to emerge. Despite his youth, he had a record, including a prior arrest for making terroristic threats that shut down a high school in November 2021. The fatal shooting of Officer Fitzgerald was no isolated event. It was the violent culmination of reckless choices that had built up for years. During questioning, detectives learned Feffer had even tried to melt down the murder weapon in a desperate bid to destroy the evidence. Investigators discovered a badly burned handgun inside a fire pit on his family's property. His trial began on June 23, 2025. The state built its case with security footage, forensic data, and devastating testimony from Feffer's younger brother, Dean, who was right there with him that night. Dean walked the jury through their normal afternoon, visiting an art shop and walking through Center City, stopping by the Temple campus before ending up at a convenience store on Silabor Avenue. Near that convenience store, Officer Fitzgerald spotted them. Dean explained they wore hoodies and face masks, which was just typical Philly style for a cold night. He testified that they both ran, but he ultimately stopped in a backyard, completely out of breath. Less than a minute later, he heard 6 or 7 gunshots ring out. The defense had almost nothing to work with. Their strategy was to argue that Feffer panicked and acted out of pure fear, reacting impulsively when he saw the police officer. They argued he should only face third-degree murder charges, not first-degree. But the prosecution's case was devastating. A nearby doorbell camera had captured everything. It showed Fitzgerald catching Feffer, the struggle, and then Feffer standing over the fallen officer, firing multiple times. Quiet tears fell throughout the crowded courtroom as the video played. Others walked out to avoid seeing it. The trial lasted just 3 days, and the jury deliberated for only 18 minutes before returning with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Under Pennsylvania law, a first-degree murder conviction for killing a police officer carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison without parole. There is absolutely no room for judicial leniency and no chance for a reduced sentence, and zero hope of ever walking free. On June 25, 2025, immediately after the verdict, Miles Feffer was sentenced to life without parole, plus an extra 22.5 to 45 years for robbery. Asked if he had anything to say, Feffer simply responded, "No, Your Honor." Officer Fitzgerald's widow, Marissa, was overwhelmed but deeply grateful. "I am just really grateful that the jury saw the truth, and the judge gave him the harsh sentence he deserved." She said, "We just kept praying and kept our faith in God. It was surprising. I did not think it would come back that fast. Honestly, I was nervous. But God answers prayers, and He answered ours today." Miles Feffer, still only in his early 20s, will spend his remaining days behind bars, never to experience freedom again. He will never build a career, start a family, or live the life he could have had if he had chosen differently that February night. And the family of Officer Christopher Fitzgerald will never get him back. His 4 children must grow up without a father, while his wife navigates life as a grieving widow. His fellow officers will carry the heavy weight of his loss for the rest of their careers. The tragic case became a flashpoint for intense debates about crime, policing, and the constant dangers officers face every single day. Temple University quickly beefed up security. The city reopened tough conversations about youth violence, while law enforcement groups held up Fitzgerald's story to highlight the sheer risks officers take just by putting on the badge. For Miles Feffer, there is no path to redemption. There are no second chances. There is only the brutal reality of a prison cell, and the knowledge that one violent split-second decision cost him everything. Case 8. Akhenaton Jones. The Dominique Fells case. Some crimes are so calculated, so shocking in their cruelty, that they seem entirely impossible to comprehend. The case of Akhenaton Jones is one of those chilling stories, a tragedy that highlights not just individual violence, but the dangers haunting vulnerable communities. On June 8, 2020, Dominique Remy Fells, a 27-year-old transgender fashion designer, was stolen from the world in a brutal act that shocked Philadelphia and sparked nationwide outrage. Dominique was beloved for her creativity, her warmth, and her big dreams of making it in the fashion industry. She had been actively building her own brand and pursuing her design passion, frequently sharing her creations with friends and supporters on social media. She was the heart of a tight-knit community, someone who brought bright light and endless energy to everyone she met. Her friends remembered her as someone who was always ready to step up and help others. She deeply understood the struggles of transgender individuals and worked tirelessly to build safe spaces for her community. But on that warm June evening, she made the tragic mistake of trusting the wrong person. She went to the West Philadelphia home of Akhenaton Jones on the 3900 block of Powelton Avenue. The horrors inside that home would eventually come to light through forensics, witness statements, and security footage, painting a picture of violence so extreme it defies explanation. Court records and visitor accounts from that night show that at Jones's house, Dominique and Jones went into a bedroom together, while the others stayed elsewhere in the home. The guests eventually left, but when they returned later, they realized something terrible had occurred. The bedroom was a scene of sheer brutality. Jones's actions went far beyond a sudden fit of rage. His attack was calculated, relentless, and systematic, but he was far from finished. Instead of calling for help or showing regret, he immediately began covering his tracks. For 3 long days, he tried to destroy the evidence, hoping to hide the victim's identity and escape justice. On June 11, 2020, a passerby found human remains in the Schuylkill River. Soon, more remains were discovered inside a trash bag nearby. This grim find terrified the local neighborhood and sparked an urgent murder investigation. Acting fast, detectives secured a search warrant for Jones's home, stepping into a crime scene that confirmed their worst suspicions. Inside, the biological evidence left behind told a truly sickening story. They seized tools used to commit the crime, along with the protective gear he wore. The forensics were absolutely damning and incredibly grim. Nearby security cameras provided the final, undeniable pieces of the puzzle. Footage showed Jones packing a white van and heading to the Schuylkill River to dump the evidence. He had carefully planned how to wipe away his sins, but he underestimated the reach of modern forensic science and the resolve of the investigators. Genetic testing on the biological samples pointed straight to Jones. There was zero room for doubt, no chance of a mix-up. The physical proof put him directly in that room, shredding any alibi his lawyers could dream up. Sensing the police closing in, Jones fled Philadelphia for California, praying the cross-country distance would shield him from justice. It didn't. On November 9, 2020, police cornered and arrested him in Los Angeles. He was returned to Philadelphia to face charges of first-degree murder, abuse of remains, and possessing instruments of crime. The horrific nature of the crime instantly caught the attention of the media, but also because Dominique was a trans woman of color, a demographic facing disproportionately high rates of violence. Activists quickly pointed to Dominique's tragedy to spotlight the national crisis of violence threatening Black transgender women. Memorial vigils kept her memory alive, making her name a rallying cry against hate, bigotry, and systemic failure. Her loved ones grieved not only for her stolen life, but the savage way she was taken. In December 2024, the first trial ended with a hung jury, unable to reach a unanimous decision despite the proof. This was a massive setback for the prosecution and a crushing blow to Dominique's family, who desperately wanted closure. However, the district attorney refused to let the killer walk away that easily. They announced an immediate retrial, which got underway in June 2025. This time, the prosecutors sharpened their focus, guiding the new jury through the evidence piece by piece. They laid out the genetic matches, the security footage, the eyewitness stories, and the scientific reports. The defense had nothing to offer in response. No credible alternative theory, no way to argue against the science, and no defense strong enough to beat the proof. After days of debating, the jury returned. Guilty of first-degree murder, abuse of remains, and possessing criminal tools. The courtroom fell dead silent as the decision was read. For her family, it brought a heavy, painful validation, knowing that the justice system had finally recognized the horrific crime committed against her. Jones is set to be sentenced in late September 2025. Under Pennsylvania state law, a first-degree murder conviction means automatic life in prison with no chance of parole. There will be no early release, no parole boards, and absolutely no second chances. Akhenaton Jones will spend the rest of his days behind cold prison bars, but Dominique Fells will never get to live the life she truly deserved. It remains a painful reminder of the raw violence still targeting vulnerable people. Ultimately, Dominique's tragic story sparked a massive movement to protect transgender people, demanding justice for those whose lives are stolen simply for daring to exist as themselves. Now her memory lives on through local advocacy and the family who loved her, and through the endless fight for safety. In 2020, Dominique was reported as at least the fifth transgender woman killed in the United States that year, out of at least 25 gender non-conforming people lost to violence. Her loss devastated Philly's LGBTQ+ community, which was already reeling from relentless acts of violence against its most vulnerable members. This tragic case forced raw conversations about who society actually protects and who is simply left exposed to dangerous predators. National organizations and local LGBTQ+ advocacy groups held emotional vigils in Dominique's honor, shining a light on the epidemic of violence against trans women of color, reminding everyone that her life truly mattered, that she deserved to follow her dreams without living in fear, and that her death exposed a systemic failure to shield society's most marginalized communities. In court, prosecutors demanded the maximum penalty, making it clear that they would never tolerate such brutal violence against anyone in their city. For Dominique's family, enduring 2 trials was exhausting and traumatic. They had to relive the horrific details of her final moments multiple times, listening to brutal testimony and enduring a hung jury before they finally saw any real justice. Her mother and siblings attended both trials, determined to see justice served and to ensure her name would never be forgotten. Their presence in that courtroom proved their deep love for her and their commitment to honoring her memory. Let's look at Case 9, the Michelle Washington investigation. Some people dedicate their entire lives to helping others, lifting up communities, and creating safe spaces for the vulnerable. Michelle Tameka. Washington was exactly that. A 40-year-old advocate and mentor in Philadelphia's LGBTQ+ community. She was widely known for her kindness, her quiet strength, and her dedication to supporting her peers. For years, she worked closely with younger community members, offering them crucial guidance, constant support, and an open ear to anyone who felt they had nowhere else to go. To Philadelphia's transgender community, she was a true role model and a constant source of inspiration. But on May 19, 2019, her life was violently cut short in an act that devastated everyone. It was just after 5 in the morning when gunshots echoed through the Franklinville section of North Philly. Michelle was on the 3400 block of North 11th Street when someone shot her multiple times. The wounds were devastating. Hit in highly critical areas, it was clear that someone wanted her dead and made absolutely sure of it. Neighbors called 911, and emergency crews rushed Michelle straight to Temple University Hospital. Doctors did everything possible, but her severe injuries were simply too catastrophic. She died a short time later, yet another name on the tragic list of trans women stolen by violence. Homicide detectives soon arrived, starting the meticulous work of collecting evidence from the scene. They recovered spent shell casings from the pavement, trying to reconstruct what happened in those dark morning hours. But they never expected the actual killer to insert himself directly into the active investigation. A local man named Troy Bailey approached the detectives, claiming he witnessed the entire shooting. He gave them a detailed description of a fake suspect, acting like a good citizen who just wanted to help. But seasoned detectives know a classic rule. Sometimes the most helpful witness is actually the one hiding a dark secret. Bailey's story quickly fell apart. He and his girlfriend had gathered at the scene, which wasn't unusual on its own. Locals always gather when a tragedy strikes their neighborhood. But their stories to the police were highly inconsistent. They contradicted each other on major details, constantly changed their stories when pressed, and raised massive red flags. Investigators soon realized Bailey wasn't a witness at all. He was the killer, trying to spin a fake narrative to deflect blame. Investigators quickly shifted their focus. They grabbed security footage from nearby cameras, hoping to check Bailey's alibi. But what they found on screen was absolutely damning. The tape placed Bailey right near the scene during the attack, completely shattering his claim that he only showed up afterward. His timeline fell apart, and his stories grew weaker the more they pressed. But the real breakthrough came from forensics. Detectives searched Bailey's home on the 1100 block of West Venango Street in May 2019, just days after the murder. Inside the house, they found ammunition. Ballistics tests revealed the bullets in Bailey's possession were the exact type used to kill Michelle. They couldn't prove these exact bullets were fired, but the link tightened the noose around him. DNA evidence tied him closer to the crime, even if the public court records kept the exact details classified. With the security tapes, the matching ammunition, and his lies, prosecutors had an airtight case. Bailey was arrested and charged with third-degree murder and multiple weapons offenses. Rather than face a jury of 12 peers who would hear all this damning evidence, Bailey chose a bench trial, leaving his fate entirely up to a judge. In May 2021, Judge Rosemary DeFino Nastasi reviewed the forensic files and heard testimonies from detectives and witnesses. Prosecutors argued that Bailey intentionally killed Michelle Washington, then made it worse by lying to cops to throw off the investigation. The judge agreed. Bailey was convicted of third-degree murder. On July 22, 2021, the judge sentenced him to 25 to 50 years in prison, a harsh penalty that reflected his brutal actions and the deliberate nature of the crime. At the sentencing, Michelle's sister, Crystal Davis, spoke directly to the court and to Bailey. Her words burned with raw pain and anger. She described the deep shatter her family felt, the unfillable void left behind, and her sheer fury at Bailey's total lack of remorse. Even trapped by overwhelming evidence, Bailey showed zero accountability, zero empathy, and no understanding of the life he stole. The state made it clear they did not believe Michelle was targeted for being transgender. The real motive stayed locked in mystery, making the entire tragedy even more senseless. Michelle had no enemies and was not involved in any neighborhood beefs. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time when Bailey crossed her path and pulled the trigger. Yet regardless of why, Michelle Washington's death joined a devastating and familiar pattern. Advocates reported she was one of at least 25 transgender or gender non-conforming people murdered across the country in 2019. Her murder shattered Philadelphia's LGBTQ+ community, a community already reeling from constant violence against its most vulnerable members. Today, Troy Bailey is locked away in a Pennsylvania state prison. He will not see a parole board until he serves at least 25 years, ensuring he will not taste freedom again until he is well into middle age. For those who loved Michelle, no prison sentence brings true peace. No amount of years can bring her back or ease the ache left behind. Still, Michelle Washington is remembered at local vigils and memorials as a bright soul who gave far more than she ever took. She served as a mentor, a fierce advocate, and a loyal friend to those who desperately needed someone on their side. Her life and legacy still matter, keeping the fire lit for those fighting for the safety of transgender communities. Philly's LGBTQ+ community hosted several rallies and memorials in the painful months following her tragic passing. Local activists used the tragedy to spotlight the terrifying wave of violence targeting trans women of color. They shouted that Michelle's death was not some isolated event, but a symptom of a national crisis that demands action. Community leaders spoke out about building safe havens, boosting protection for vulnerable people, and stamping out the root causes of transphobic hatred. Michelle's death also sparked critical debates about how the court system handles violence against trans victims and if prosecutors take these cases as seriously as they must. For Michelle's family, especially her sister Crystal, the final verdict brought a heavy, bittersweet sense of closure. Throughout the legal process, Crystal openly voiced her anger toward Bailey, deeply frustrated by his complete lack of remorse. She attended every single court hearing, determined to be her sister's voice and ensure the justice system didn't forget Michelle. Her victim impact statement at sentencing was raw and deeply emotional, describing not just the painful loss of Michelle, but the devastating ripple effects it left on everyone who loved her. Case 10. Talem Hunt. The double attack. Violence rarely ends quietly. A dispute that isn't resolved the first time around rarely ends peacefully the second. Talem Hunt and Cody Hargett learned that brutal lesson in the most tragic way possible. Their story is defined by simmering tension, unresolved conflict, and a deadly rematch that left one man dead and another facing life behind bars. The first clash erupted on September 20th, 2022, in the Logan section of Philadelphia. Cody Hargett, a 45-year-old man, pulled up to Hunt's home on the 5200 block of Sydenham Street. What drew him there remains a mystery. Whether it was a bad debt, a personal grudge, or something else entirely has never been fully explained. Detectives tried to map out the relationship between them, but neither man had a documented history with the other. The only certainty is that the visit ended in blood. Court records show that Hunt shot Hargett twice in the shoulder during that initial confrontation. The wounds were severe but not fatal. Harrot was rushed to a hospital, treated for his injuries, and survived. For most people, that would have been the end of it. Victims usually avoid their attackers, press charges, and let the law handle things. But Cody Hargett made a far more dangerous choice. He went back. On October 9th, 2022, less than 3 weeks after being shot, Harrot returned to Hunt's home. His reasons for returning remain a mystery. Perhaps he wanted answers. Or maybe he wanted a fight. Maybe he believed he could settle their score once and for all. Whatever his reasons, it was a decision that cost him his life. When Harrot arrived, he and Hunt spoke briefly on the sidewalk outside. Eyewitnesses later testified that while the conversation was incredibly tense, it wasn't immediately violent. But then, things shifted. Har grabbed Hunt, sparking a sudden physical struggle. It is unclear if Harrot wanted to fight or just confront Hunt, but the response was instant and deadly. Hunt pulled a gun and opened fire. Bullets struck Harrot repeatedly as he collapsed. The shooting didn't stop even after he hit the ground and was completely helpless. In total, he was shot 9 times that afternoon, on top of the 2 gunshot wounds he had survived just weeks before. This time, there would be no recovery. Harrot died from his wounds shortly after reaching the hospital. For detectives, the case offered clear facts alongside some highly frustrating gaps. The physical evidence was solid, including spent casings at the scene, forensics linking Hunt to the shooting, and eyewitnesses placing him there. But establishing a motive proved far more difficult. Why did Hunt shoot Har the first time? Why did Harrot go back? What was their deadly feud actually about? These questions had no clean answers. What the investigators did have, however, was technology. Cell phone location records proved that Hunt was at the scene during both of the attacks. His phone pinged off nearby towers at the exact moments of the shootings, creating a digital trail that was impossible to deny. Police also pulled incriminating data from Hunt's device, though the exact details of that evidence were kept out of public court filings. Right at the crime scene, forensic specialists recovered items coded in Hunt's DNA. Backed by cell phone data, eyewitness accounts, and forensic findings, prosecutors had built an incredibly strong case. Hunt was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, aggravated assault for the initial shooting, weapons violations, and possessing instruments of crime. His trial began in April 2025 before a Philadelphia jury. Prosecutors carefully guided the jury through both incidents, mapping out a pattern of violence that began in September and ended with Har's death that October. They presented the mobile tracking, the DNA, witness statements, and ballistics. Meanwhile, the defense claimed Hunt acted in self-defense during the final encounter, arguing that Har had grabbed him first, triggering the physical struggle, and that Hunt was merely defending himself. But the prosecution dismantled that claim by pointing to the sheer number of shots fired, noting that several hit the victim while he lay helpless on the pavement. Self-defense requires a proportional response to an active threat. But shooting someone 9 times, including while they lie defenseless on the ground, goes far beyond what anyone would call necessary to stop a danger. The jury agreed. After reviewing the evidence, they returned a guilty verdict on all counts. First-degree murder, aggravated assault, carrying an unlicensed firearm, and possessing an instrument of crime. Under Pennsylvania law, first-degree murder carries no leniency. The sentencing is automatic and absolute. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Talum Hunt, born November 16, 2000, was just 24 when sentenced. He will spend his remaining days in a Pennsylvania state prison. He will never know freedom as an adult. He will never build a career, raise a family, or live the life he could have had if he had chosen differently on those 2 fateful days in 2022. For Cody Hargett's family, the guilty verdict offered some justice, but it could never bring back the man they loved. Hargett's choice to go back to Hunt's home after the initial shooting still leaves painful questions. What was he thinking? What did he hope to achieve? Could his death have been prevented if he had just stayed away and let the police handle the first confrontation? Detectives ultimately concluded they could not establish a clear motive for either violent clash. No evidence of an active feud existed, with no prior history of bad blood to explain why these 2 men became so violently entangled. The tragedy serves as a grim example of the relentless cycle of street violence plaguing local neighborhoods. These are situations where petty disputes escalate to gunfire, and conflicts that could be settled peacefully end in bloodshed. For Philadelphia, the Hunt trial was a stark reminder that street violence rarely stays contained. The first shooting in September settled absolutely nothing. It only paved the way for a deadlier second act. And when Hargett returned in October, any hope for keeping the peace vanished the second they clashed. The case also highlights the struggle police face in stopping cycle of revenge attacks. Following the September shooting, Hargett could have helped the police and given a statement, letting the legal system handle the crime. Instead, he chose retaliation, going back to confront the very gunman who had already shot him. That choice, while fueled by raw emotion, proved to be fatal. Local advocates pointed to this case to highlight the destructive path of retaliation that destroys city blocks. They emphasized that minor clashes escalate in an instant, and without quick intervention and social outreach, these disputes inevitably spiral. Many demanded more neighborhood mediation efforts, expanded mental health support, and real resources to help residents settle arguments before guns are drawn. For Hunt's family, the trial and eventual guilty verdict brought immense pain. Hunt was just 21 when he took Hargett's life, leaving his relatives struggling to match the boy they loved with the killer in the courtroom. His relatives sat quietly in the gallery, watching as the devastating evidence was laid bare. They had to accept that despite their love, his actions were completely indefensible. Now, Talem Hunt has a lifetime behind bars to think about what he did. Cody Hargett will never get a second chance at life, leaving two shattered families to deal with choices that can never be taken back. The tragedy serves as a stark reminder of how quickly lives are ruined by gun violence, with waves of grief spreading far past the victim and the shooter to engulf entire families and communities.